Innovation Hub to talk with you just a little bit more about how you might use social media to meet your public affairs objectives. My experience working with public affairs stems from over a decade worth of work with the U.S. Navy as a reserve public affairs officer. When I'm not busy working for the Navy, I work for a company called Booz Allen Hamilton, and my role with this company is to develop strategic communication plans for our clients to help them plan out when they will employ social media tactics to meet their communication objectives. I'm also a member of the Inter-Allied Confederation of Reserve Officers, which has afforded me an opportunity to work with a lot of amazing people. Now, the purpose of this lesson is to get on the same page with some terminology and understanding how things work together. For example, I know that you've worked with a couple of the instructors already about the security of social media or the psychology of social media, but how does social media with your cell phone and the newspaper work hand in hand together? Well, in today's society and in a lot of places around the world, what will happen is that an article will get posted on social media first, and then it will end up in the next day or so in a regular traditional paper. The traditional paper is called traditional news. The news on your phone is called social media. We're also going to talk about some other things like objective-based social media planning. And what does that mean? And we'll also talk about how do you establish keywords that will increase search engine optimization so that people can find your content out there on the World Wide Web. Finally, I'll use a couple of examples to show you how this all works together. We'll talk about Twitter, we'll talk about a platform called HootSuite, and we'll talk about Google Alerts. Are you ready? Let's get to our computers and look at the slides. Okay, so just in case you wanted to write down the course objectives, here they are again. We're going to talk about traditional media and new media, how social media can be an objective-based tool, what does it mean to reach our target audience, and how to create keywords, which will help keyword searches. And we'll go over an example of Twitter, HootSuite, and how to establish Google Alerts so that news information can be pushed to you. I'll also take on any questions that you might have after the conclusion of this course. Traditional media and new media work hand in hand together. Traditional media is defined by things that you typically think about when you think about the news. Newspapers, photojournalism, TV broadcast news, radio news, magazines, and trade journals. And new media or social media are things that we're coming to realize is where most of our audiences are getting their news. Things like Twitter, Facebook, Google+, Instagram, Skype, Google Hangouts, blogs. There's hundreds of these kinds of social media interactions. But basic journalism principles always exist when these tools are being used to broadcast news or push out news to an audience. That is, both traditional media and new media need to answer at least 4 of the 5 basic questions: who, what, why, when, where, and sometimes even how. I've worked with a lot of sailors and Marines recently who say things like, it's just Facebook, or it's just some other social media platform. But with social media, it can be objective-based as well. Just like traditional media, social media is the place where our audience is going for information. Social media can be used to direct traffic to our organizational websites by keyword optimization, and it can also be where the news media goes as a trusted resource to get information about your command. Social media objectives, just like in traditional news, can be measurable, it can be tracked, and we can really figure out if our messages are resonating with our target audience. Social media, in fact, should be a piece of our overarching communication plans. This does not, by any stretch of the imagination, replace all of the stuff that we're doing to talk to our audience on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis. But social media should be augmenting those efforts to get people to know how to get to our content faster. Okay, but you might be saying by now, which social media network should I be on? As you can see from this slide, there are a couple of examples of what social media networks are really hitting some interesting targets in terms of their active users. Facebook, 1.35 billion. Google Plus, 540 million. And they're saying as of late that they have 1 billion active members. 200 million on Instagram, 92 million active users on Flickr. You really want to be where your audience is, though. If your audience does not use Facebook, then it doesn't make sense to be there. For example, I was working with an organization recently, and they wanted to get rid of their traditional news platform, a magazine, because they felt like it cost too much money, and they wanted to move all of that content onto Facebook. However, when they surveyed their readership, what they found was most of their readers don't go to Facebook to get their news. Some of them didn't even have an account. And so it really made sense for them to keep their traditional media platform as a way to reach out to their target audience. Again, you want to be where your target audience is. A lot of that audience will probably be on Facebook, but it's not the only place that they might be. You want to figure this out. Do what makes sense for you and your organization. I've labeled this next slide, creating keywords. A keyword is a tag. It's a way to describe in one word or two what is your content about. For example, if you were to write an article about the efforts to quell the ISIL insurgency in Iraq, you might say something like ISIL as a keyword. That keyword would be tagged to the information that you're putting out there, whether it's an article or a photo. When somebody's searching for your content, they might also search for something that says ISIL and put that into a browser to search for whatever comes up. Keywords, in other words, can be anything. They can be general or they can be specific. And they can be included in the metadata, which is in the background of your photos, or it can be included in a URL. But the intent of a keyword is to choose something that will optimize the way someone will find the information that you have put out online so that they can find that information on your website. Let's look at some examples of a social media network. Twitter is one. Now, some of you have already established a Twitter account, and Twitter is kind of like a wire service. So, say you've established an article, but you don't know how to get people to know that you have an article out there online. And so you might say something like, come visit us at NATO as your article topic, and it's an event that you're hosting at NATO. Well, Twitter is a way to put this out there in a format that is easy to find. It's not convoluted. It's not buried into a lot of text. Twitter is limited by 140 characters, including spaces. And basically what you can do is you can use a Twitter post to help people jump from your Twitter page to your website to find out more information. Next slide, we see HootSuite as another example. Now, HootSuite takes several different profiles on Twitter and puts them into a dashboard, somewhat of a format. And it helps you follow several different entities or people that have some kind of prominence out there. Reporters, for example, might be folks that you can personally follow, or a radio personality, or organizations. You might want to know who is saying what about a particular situation. For example, P5+1 is either happened or happening, and when you look at, well, who do I want to know who's saying anything about P5+1? You might be able to look at the specific Ministry of Defense for your country and follow them via HootSuite so that you can see that country's response with another country's response to the situation at hand. And finally, we have Google Alerts. Now, Google Alerts works in a way where you have to kind of sign up, if you will, for an alert. So say you want to follow a mudslide in Macedonia. You can go into your Google Plus account and establish a Google alert so that any news about mudslides in Macedonia will be pushed to you into your email box, and it will have a link to go to that exact story once it's released. I encourage you to use any of these platforms so that you can gain familiarity and a comfort level, because it really does help when you know how to find the news that's out there. Not only because you want to get your content out to your target audience, but you also want to know how people are responding to the content that you have out there online. And this is one way, or a couple of ways rather, to find out how to get your information out, but also how to find out what people are saying about the information that you've put out there already. All right, so let's kind of wrap this up a little bit. We've talked about social media being used as a public affairs tool, and we talked about that in terms of talking to our audience group in a two-way fashion. We put information out, people know how to find us, they can also talk to us, and we can respond to that information. That's that two-way communication model. We also talked about the importance of having objectives for our communication. And so when we look at social media being used by traditional news media platforms, we can say, well, we can get our information out on social media first so that people know that we have new content available to them. But this is where some people get stuck. Still, people want to know, what is the best social media platform for me to be on? And it's not always an easy answer. I made it sound easy in the beginning when I said, just be where your audience is. But what if your audience turns out to be a little bit evenly spread across the various social media platforms, particularly the top 5? What's the difference between these platforms? We've talked a little bit about Facebook, for example, and it seems to be the premier social media platform right now. But what else makes it so special? Well, they use keywords with the hashtags, much like Twitter does. They also have the Google Analytic tracking code, so you can see the performance of your page on Facebook. And to that end, you have an option. You can choose to establish a Facebook page as a personality, like you would with your own personal account, or you can choose to establish a Facebook page as an organizational page. So it takes you specifically out of the limelight, and it's your organization that's being communicated with, even though you might be the person on the back end making posts and putting content out via Facebook. The other thing to look at in terms of social media platforms is to see what other platforms can offer you that may be a little bit different. Google Plus, for example, prides itself on being a professional platform where a real return on investment can be measured. Some sources say that Google Plus has over 1 billion users, and they are building a valuable backbone to show how content and users can connect to each other. It is also a platform where you can write a long message and share it as a link on Twitter. And so it has a very interesting interface, how it operates with other social media platforms. And the interesting thing about what Google Plus can do with the new renovations that Google has made to this social media platform is that you can put things in bold and in italics. And it also uses keywords, just like Facebook. Flickr recently did an overhaul of their social media platform, and they have what's called Flickr 3.0. Flickr allows you to browse, edit, and store photos. You can also store video, and you can also organize those videos and photos into albums. Instagram, by contrast, can store video as well, but only 15 seconds of video versus the 30 seconds of video Flickr can store. And also, Flickr has a greater degree of privacy controls that it offers than Instagram. You do have a drawback, though, with Flickr, and that is that it requires you to have a Yahoo account to sign into in order to get to Flickr. So these are just some of the interesting differences between the social media platforms. Twitter is your baseline. I want to let people know I have something for them to see. And it kind of cuts across all of these social media platforms, because what you can post on Twitter, you can post on Facebook, you can post on Google+, and you can have it as a way to define what is the meaning behind the photo you posted on Flickr. So hopefully that helps you a little bit more in terms of knowing how to prioritize your effort with social media sites. Please also keep in mind you want to have a sustainable objective. For example, if you're going to engage your audience on social media, you will want to commit a certain amount of time to keep that content constantly refreshed. You don't want to forget about your social media sites that you've committed to, because if you do, if you only go on every once in a while and there's not a regular pattern to how you go on to your social media sites, your viewership will reduce and not come back. And so you really want to make sure, do I have the time? Do I have the commitment? Do I have something to say on a regular basis so that I can produce content on a regular basis for the audience that goes to these social media sites? In conclusion, social media is where our audience is, and it is complemented by traditional media. What a traditional media medium might have, such as Wall Street Journal, for a news article, it might have started as an article of interest on social media that gets morphed into a standard paper format. There are a variety of methods to seek information posted on social media. You can search for that information. You can go to the platform specifically, like Pinterest, like Instagram, like Facebook, like Google+. And keywords help us find a shorter way to get to all of these websites. Thank you very much for joining in. More to come.